And they are seeing that the brain has natural mechanisms and pumps that can rid the brain of excess glutamate under natural, normal consumption of glutamate from natural foods like Grandma and Grandpa ate. But at constant subjection of this powerful hormone, or I should say amino acid neurotransmitter, can actually damage those very mechanisms or pumps that remove that excess glutamate from the brain. And so we get a buildup. And then we're seeing all these epidemics, neurological disorders and problems with our children. We're getting...
Yes, very sad.
That's the worst. That's what affects me the most, and that's what
right.
I am really involved with.
Yes, in Dr. Schwartz's book, he has several testimonies of young children who had severe problems, you know, attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity and all sorts of things.
Yes.
And it's remarkable when MSG was removed from their diets, those children were perfectly normal. And here in our country, we have fomented this problem, and we have risked the very lives of our heritage and our children by feeding them poisonous food. And I do call MSG a poison, personally, because I see its devastating effects. And when I read Dr. Schwartz's book, In Bad Taste, I got mad, dear listeners.
Good for you. Good for you.
I'll tell you, there was a righteous anger come up in me, and I said, this has got to stop. Yeah. And I went on a personal crusade just to let people know that MSG is very, very poisonous, and it can cause all kinds of health problems. Yeah. Now, I know in your story that is posted on your website, Debbie, you talk about the fact that at one time you gave Chinese cooking classes, and you liked Chinese food.
Yes, I took lessons first with my sister and a friend, because after all, my doctor said I needed to get out more with adults because, you know, stress was causing all my pain. But, yes, and of course I was using accent in some of my cooking, and soy sauce, and also bean sauce, and oyster sauce, teriyaki sauce, all of that. So if you go to a Chinese restaurant and you ask them not to add MSG, sure, they don't have to add the pure crystal form, the sodium salt of the glutamic acid, which is MSG. It's a pure white crystal. And they might, of course, be fine in doing that. But the thing is, they don't realize, some of them don't realize, even the people that work there in some of these restaurants, and I don't mean just Chinese restaurants, this is all restaurants, in most restaurants, they don't even know that the sauces that they use, that are all prepared ahead of time, that they buy from big warehouses, or are the broths that they use, contain a high percentage of MSG already added to them. And so they may tell you, no, you know, you're not going to have any MSG in your meal, and then you don't know why you got sick. And another important thing I think everybody needs to remember if they're wondering if they are reacting to MSG at all, is that it can take anywhere up to 36 hours to react to excess glutamate, the buildup in your brain and in your system. So you may not ever correlate, like I didn't for 21 years, that the food I ate on Friday night was giving me that massive headache by Sunday morning.
Right.
So this is a very important thing to remember about it.
So a little bit of a delayed reaction,
yes.
But nevertheless it was still working.
Yes, and so it's hard to make that correlation, that connection, and so a person finds it hard to believe that, you know, that something as simple as the meal they ate could give them so many problems. And the questions always come up, well, if it was bad for us, then why would it be on supermarket shelves, you know?
Right.
And that's a whole political subject right there. And it has to do, again, with money and the power of the food industry and Washington, D.C.
Well, I know MSG has been touted as being also a food preservative.
Yeah.
And because we have become less and less an agrarian society, our food has to be stored for a while, you know, and shipped to different parts of the country before it's used. Right. So we need to preserve it, quote unquote.
Right.
And in doing that, we have basically destroyed our food.
That's right. Yes. And in countries in Europe, they don't even allow the use of certain. I think in France there's just a handful of preservatives that are allowed in that country, and we have 10,000 preservatives and food additives that are, most of them have not even been tested, because a lot of people don't realize that the FDA does not have to test these things. They allow the burden of proof to be upon the producers of these substances, these food additives. And so, you can get a very biased test done on the side of the manufacturer. And the FDA, that is a huge federal group, but they cannot be the watchdog for every substance that is created. There are so many new substances on the market every year, and new food additives. I recently read that there is a fermented wheat protein that has just been developed by a company, and they claim that there's more glutamic acid in this product than in MSG, and that it can be used with a clean label. So there again, we have to be so careful and read up and learn what these things are in order to stay healthy. And according to Dr. Blaylock, I don't know, have you read his book?
I do not have his book yet.
Okay, and he is a neurologist, a neurosurgeon, I should say, an author, and he has written the book Excitotoxins, The Taste That Kills. Excitotoxins being MSG, aspartame or nutraceutics, and L-cysteine, the big three. L-cysteine is used in a lot of baked goods, in tortillas and in baked goods breads. And this is also just another excitatory neurotoxin that works on the same receptors that glutamate does. And we constantly have to be aware of all these new things coming out and keep reading about it. When I was a child, I'm 58, as I said. Now, we rarely saw an obese child or adult. If we did, we were told not to stare. It was blamed on, quote, gland trouble.
Right.
But we ate lots of food growing up. We ate lots of beef and roast beef and ice cream and potatoes and gravy, cakes and cookies that Grandma cooked, and baked for us, and Mom, and it was wonderful. And of course, nobody had MSG. I mean, it was just barely starting to be used in this country in the 50s when I was growing up, and but by the 70s, it had reached large usage. The amount doubling, as I said, with each decade, and by the 70s, it was the first time that it was really at a dosage that was more dangerous for humans. And then Dr. John Olney, he started testing MSG on lab animals, as I mentioned, and he discovered that mice developed retinal damage and stunted skeletal development and brain lesions in the hypothalamus region of the brain and obesity as they matured, and also pathological changes in several of the brain regions associated with endocrine function. And so he even states that, aspartame loads on the same receptors, so the same thing happens because we drink diet pop so much, and
right.
5,000 other products that contain aspartame that the industry brags that they use their product in. So the latest research is now looking into leptin abnormalities in obese people, and leptin is an appetite suppressant hormone, and it regulates energy and control of our appetite and body weight. And so this is another thing, since they know, Dr. Olney has stated that MSG is an endocrine disruptor. It messes up the natural function of our glands and our hormones because it works directly on the hypothalamus region of the brain, which controls our entire endocrine system. So we need more research in this area.
Yes.
Definitely.
I'm very glad that you are well researched and able to share all this with our audience. Debbie, we do have to take a break. It's the top of the hour. Could you stay just for a few more minutes after we break?